Is this some kind of joke? The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, sliced through the desert air. Corporal Evans, barely out of his teens but wearing his Marine Corps uniform like a suit of armor, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the rifle resting on the shooting bench. "Sir, you can't be serious about bringing that thing here." Alan Palmer, a man whose 82 years were etched into the lines around his eyes and the patient set of his jaw, did not turn his head. His gaze remained fixed downrange, where heat shimmered off the baked earth, distorting the distant targets into wavering specters. He sat on a simple stool, his posture relaxed but rooted to the ground. The rifle in question was indeed a peculiar sight. Its custom-built chassis and stock were coated in a flat, non-reflective orange, the color of a construction sign or a child's toy. It looked utterly out of place among the matte blacks, desert tans, and olive drabs of the serious military-grade hardware that populated the long-distance range. Another young Marine, a private first class with a spray of freckles across his nose, snickered. "Maybe he thinks it's a water gun, Corporal, for when he gets thirsty." The small group of them, all crisp uniforms and high and tight haircuts, shared a laugh. They were the new breed, masters of digital scopes and ballistic calculators, and to them, this old man and his garish rifle were relics from a forgotten age, an amusing distraction before their real training began. Evans took a step closer, his shadow falling over Alan's bench. "I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your equipment, sir. This is a live fire range for active duty personnel. We're conducting advanced sniper training. That," he pointed again at the orange rifle, "is a distraction and a safety hazard." His tone was a carefully rehearsed blend of authority and condescension, the kind a young man uses when he feels he has all the power in a situation. Alan Palmer remained silent, his hands resting calmly on his knees. His stillness seemed to unnerve the corporal more than any argument could. It was an unnatural quiet, a reservoir of patience so deep it felt like a silent rebuke. The range, a sprawling expanse of graded dirt and rock carved out of the Mojave Desert, was a place of thunderous noise and precise violence. But in this small bubble of confrontation, an uncomfortable quiet had fallen. Other shooters at nearby benches had paused, their conversations tapering off as they watched the one-sided exchange. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with ballistics. Corporal Evans, feeling the eyes on him and misinterpreting the old man's silence as defiance, pressed on. His voice rose, a clear breach of range etiquette. "Did you hear me, old man? I said pack it up. What are you even doing here? This isn't the local VFW bingo night." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You probably don't even have the proper clearance to be on this facility." Alan finally moved. The motion was slow, deliberate, as he reached for his simple canvas range bag. The Marines tensed, expecting him to finally comply. Instead, he drew out a worn leather wallet, the kind that folds over on itself and is softened by decades of use. He opened it and produced a laminated card, his base access permit, and silently held it out. Evans snatched the card. He glanced at it, then did a double take. "This has to be expired, or fake." He turned it over and over in his hands, as if expecting the plastic to dissolve and reveal the deception. The name read Palmer, Alan J., and the credentials, to his visible frustration, were all in order. He shoved the card back at the old man. His inability to find a legitimate reason to eject him only fueled his irritation. "Fine. You have access," Evans conceded, his voice tight. "But that doesn't mean you can play with your toys here. We have a 4,000-meter target set up for our final qualification. It's a multi-million-dollar sensor suite, not a backstop for your personal science project." He gestured downrange toward a target so distant it was an almost invisible speck to the naked eye. "We're pushing the limits of modern technology here. The last thing we need is a stray round from whatever that is, messing up our data." The private first class, emboldened by his corporal's aggression, reached out and poked the orange rifle's stock with his finger. "Feels like cheap plastic. You probably 3D printed it in your garage." The moment the young Marine's finger touched the rifle, Alan Palmer's eyes changed. For a fraction of a second, the calm, patient gaze of the old man was gone, replaced by something ancient and hard like flint. The desert sun glinting off the rifle's scope vanished, and in its place was the dim, desperate light of a field tent, smelling of cordite and blood. He felt the phantom weight of a wounded comrade leaning against him, heard the distant rhythmic thump of mortar fire walking its way closer. A voice from that other time, young and strained, echoed in his mind. "They're coming, Al. They know we're here. You have to finish it." The orange wasn't for a joke. It was so they could find him, so the rescue chopper could spot him in the jungle canopy, a single point of unnatural color in a sea of green and brown, a beacon of last resort. He blinked, and the memory receded, leaving the bright desert sun and the smirking faces of the young Marines in its place. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken a word, but a subtle shift had occurred. The quiet dignity now had an edge, a hint of the immense gravity it held in check. Across the range, standing near the tower, a man named Gunny Miller watched the scene unfold. He was a retired master sergeant, now working as the civilian range safety officer. He'd seen his share of arrogant young NCOs, but something about this was different. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was the target of it. The old man wasn't a typical hobbyist. There was an economy of motion in the way he sat, a profound stillness that spoke of immense discipline. And the rifle, as strange as it looked, had the clean, purposeful lines of a custom tool, not a toy. Miller's eyes narrowed. He'd seen a rifle like that once before, a long time ago, in a classified briefing about a ghost, a legend from a war that the history books barely touched upon. He looked at the name he'd seen on the sign-in sheet earlier that morning. Palmer, Alan J. The name connected with the half-remembered legend in his mind, and a cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. These kids had no idea what they were doing. They weren't just disrespecting an old veteran, they were poking a sleeping giant. Miller turned, pulling his phone from his pocket. He walked behind the range tower, his back to the unfolding drama, and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number for the base's command duty officer. He was a gunny, retired or not, and he still had connections. He knew this was a massive overstep of his authority as a range civilian, a call he could get fired for making. But he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was a call he had to make. "Lieutenant," he said when the line connected, his voice low and urgent. "This is Gunny Miller out at the long-range facility. I have a situation here that you need to be aware of. We have some young Marines from the 1st Recon Battalion giving a hard time to an old-timer. They're about to cross a line, a big one." "A discipline issue, Gunny?" The voice on the other end was professional but disinterested. "Shouldn't that go through their company command?" "Normally, yes, Lieutenant," Miller said, his patience wearing thin. "But the civilian on their range is named Alan Palmer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just static. Miller could almost hear the gears turning in the young officer's head. "Palmer?" the lieutenant finally asked, the name sounding foreign. "Am I supposed to know that name?" "Just run it up the chain, Lieutenant," Miller insisted, his voice hardening. "Run it up the chain fast, and tell them it's about his rifle, the orange one." He hung up before the officer could ask any more questions. He had lit the fuse. Now he could only wait and hope the bomb didn't go off in everyone's face. Inside the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the base command center, Lieutenant Harris stared at his phone. Gunny Miller was not a man given to drama. He typed the name Alan J. Palmer's into the global military personnel database. The system spun for a moment, then a flag popped up, a bright red flag. Access restricted, eyes only, 07 and above. Harris felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. 07, that was a brigadier general. He was a second lieutenant. He stood up from his desk and walked briskly to the office of the base commander, a full colonel. He knocked and entered without waiting. "Sir, you need to see this." The colonel, a man with a face like a roadmap of every desert conflict for the past 30 years, looked up from his paperwork, annoyed. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "I got a call from Gunny Miller at the long range. There's a civilian out there, Alan Palmer." The system flagged him, heavily. The colonel's demeanor changed instantly. He came around his desk and looked at the lieutenant's screen. When he saw the name, all the color drained from his face. He didn't say a word. He just picked up the secure line on his desk, the one that connected directly to the office of the commanding general of the entire base. "Ma'am, it's Colonel Price. I apologize for the interruption. Sir, he's here. Palmer. He's on our range right now." There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am. The ghost of the valley. He's in a confrontation with some of our recon Marines." The colonel listened for another moment, his face grim. "Yes, ma'am, I'll meet you at your vehicle. We're rolling now." He slammed the phone down and looked at Harris, his eyes blazing with an intensity the lieutenant had never seen before. "Get me the commander of 1st Recon on the line. Tell him his career is on the line. Tell him General Marcus is en route to his location personally, and God help his Marines." Back at the range, Corporal Evans's patience had finally evaporated. The old man's silent refusal to yield had become a personal insult. The small crowd was growing, and he felt his authority, his very identity as a Marine NCO, being challenged by an octogenarian with a ridiculous orange gun. He had to end this. "All right, that's it. I'm done asking," he snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. "You are being a danger to this facility and my Marines. I am ordering you to vacate this firing point immediately." If you don't, I will have you detained for trespassing and obstructing a training exercise. We'll get you a nice long mental evaluation. Maybe you're confused, old man. Maybe you forgot where you are." He took a menacing step forward, reaching for Alan Palmer's shoulder, intending to physically escort him away from the bench. He never made it. The sound started as a low rumble, a vibration felt through the soles of their boots. It grew quickly into the percussive roar of multiple high-performance engines pushed to their limit. Every head on the range turned toward the main access road. A cloud of dust was billowing into the sky, chasing a convoy of 3 black, government-plated SUVs and a lead Humvee that were closing the distance at a terrifying speed. They weren't just driving, they were charging. The convoy bypassed the main parking area, driving directly onto the graded dirt of the range itself and skidding to a halt just yards behind the confrontation. The dust had barely begun to settle when doors flew open and figures emerged with a disciplined urgency that made the young recon Marines look like amateurs. Out of the lead SUV stepped Colonel Price, but it was the figure who emerged from the passenger side of the second vehicle that caused every jaw on the range to drop. Brigadier General Marcus, a woman known for her iron will and a combat record that was the stuff of legends, stepped onto the dirt. She wore her immaculate uniform, her single star gleaming in the desert sun. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the scene, taking in the arrogant posture of Corporal Evans, the stunned faces of his men, and finally settling on the calm, seated figure of Alan Palmer. She ignored everyone else. Her stride was powerful and direct as she walked straight toward the old man. The entire range had fallen utterly silent. The only sound was the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the pinging of the cooling engines. Corporal Evans stood frozen, his hand still hovering in the air where he had intended to grab Alan. He looked from the general to the old man and back again, his mind unable to process what was happening. General Marcus stopped directly in front of Alan Palmer. She didn't speak. Instead, she brought her heels together with a sharp crack. Her arm snapped up in the crispest, most respectful salute Evans had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living legend. "Mr. Palmer," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. They are ignorant of who they are addressing." She held the salute, waiting. Alan Palmer slowly, gracefully rose from his stool. He was not as tall as he once was, but he stood with a straightness that defied his years. He gave a slight acknowledging nod. Only then did the general drop her salute. She turned to face Corporal Evans, and the warmth in her eyes was replaced by glacial ice. "Corporal," she began, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who this man is?" Evans, pale and trembling, could only stammer. "No, ma'am, he's a civilian, ma'am. A civilian." The general let out a short, humorless laugh. "Corporal, you and your men are standing on grounds you've never earned, breathing air you haven't paid for, in the presence of a man who built the very world you have the privilege of serving. This is not just a civilian, this is Alan Palmer." She said the name as if it were a benediction. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "For those of you who are too young or too ignorant to know, let me educate you. This man holds the highest civilian award for valor our country can bestow. He was a special projects consultant for DARPA for 30 years. Before that, he served in places your history books don't have names for. He is credited with 5 confirmed kills at over 2,500 yards, a record that stood for nearly 4 decades, all achieved with a rifle he designed and built himself. He is the reason our sniper doctrine is what it is today. We call him the Ghost of the Valley, not because he's dead, but because he would go into places no one else could, accomplish missions no one else would dare, and leave without a trace." She took a step toward the shooting bench and gestured to the orange rifle. "And this toy you were so quick to mock? This is the Mark IV, the prototype for the M2010 sniper system you have slung on your back, Corporal. Except this one is better. He built it in a forward operating base with salvaged parts and a block of aluminum. The bright orange paint you find so amusing, that was so Medevac could spot his position for extraction after he spent 3 days holding off an entire enemy platoon alone, protecting a downed pilot. That color saved his life and the life of that pilot, who I might add went on to become a 4-star general." The silence on the range was now absolute, thick with shame and awe. Corporal Evans looked as if he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. His friends, the Marines who had been laughing and joking just minutes before, stared at their boots, their faces burning with humiliation. General Marcus turned back to the corporal, her voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You did not see a veteran. You saw an old man. You did not see a piece of history. You saw a toy. You saw weakness, where you should have seen unimaginable strength. You have dishonored your uniform, your corps and yourselves. She pointed a single trembling finger at him. You and your entire squad will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow for a personal lesson in Marine Corps history and professional courtesy. It's a lesson you will not soon forget. As the general's words hung in the air, Alan Palmer finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it had a quiet authority that commanded even more attention than the general's anger. "General," he said calmly, "they're young. They're proud. It's a good thing. They just need to learn where to point it." He turned his gaze to Corporal Evans. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, weary wisdom. "Your job isn't to be the strongest, son. It's to respect the strength that came before you. Humility is a heavier burden than any rucksack, and it's the one that will carry you the furthest." He then patted the stock of the orange rifle. As he did, another flash of memory, sharper this time. He was in a makeshift workshop, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and wet earth. He was younger, his hands steady and sure as he milled the receiver. The pilot whose leg he had just set and splinted was lying on a cot nearby, feverish. "Why orange, Al?" the pilot had mumbled. Alan didn't look up from his work. "Because I only plan on making one shot," he had replied. "After that I want to be easy to find, one way or another." The memory was a testament to a kind of focused courage that was beyond the comprehension of the young men standing before him. He was a man who had built a beacon for his own rescue or his own demise, all hinging on the success of a single impossible shot. The fallout was swift and decisive. General Marcus was true to her word. Corporal Evans and his squad spent the next month on a grueling remedial detail. They didn't just learn history, they lived it, spending their days cleaning and maintaining historical artifacts at the base museum and their evenings writing essays on the biographies of Medal of Honor recipients. They were humbled in a way that no amount of physical punishment could have achieved. The story of the old man with the orange rifle spread through the base like wildfire, a cautionary tale against arrogance and a powerful reminder that heroes often walk among them, unseen and unheralded. An official base-wide mandate was issued, requiring all personnel to attend a new annual training seminar on veteran interaction and respect for elders. A few weeks later, Corporal Evans found himself in the base library. He was there of his own volition, poring over declassified mission reports from conflicts half a century old. He looked up as the door opened, and Alan Palmer walked in. The old man moved with the same quiet purpose, heading for a section on advanced engineering. Evans's heart hammered in his chest. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He approached the old man, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. "Mr. Palmer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I wanted to apologize, properly. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Deeply wrong. I am sorry." Alan Palmer stopped and looked at the young Marine. He saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He saw the boy who had been humbled, and the man who was beginning to emerge. He offered a small, forgiving smile. "I told you, son," he said kindly. "Humility. It looks good on you. You wear it well." He nodded, and the two men stood in a moment of shared, silent understanding. The lesson had been learned. The following week, the range was closed for a special event. General Marcus stood with Colonel Price and a handful of other senior officers. Corporal Evans and his squad were there too, standing at a respectful distance. Alan Palmer was at the bench, lying in the prone position behind his orange rifle. He had been asked by the general to demonstrate what the rifle could do. The 4,000-meter target, the one Evans had claimed was beyond the reach of a toy, shimmered in the distance. There was no fanfare. Alan adjusted the scope, his movements fluid and economical. He checked the wind, his eyes seeming to read the invisible currents in the air. For a full minute he was perfectly still, a part of the landscape. Then the rifle cracked, a single sharp report that was almost anticlimactic. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the small distant screen next to the general flashed, a single green light in the dead